Hello, today we're going to be reading books about intense, obsessive friendships between kind of insane women. I'm trying to get books here that evoke the feelings of that homoerotic friendship that you had when you were in your teen years and you didn't really know how to define and still don't. What we have here is Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. This is her second novel. I read her debut, Natural Beauty, and I liked it, but I thought that she had a lot of areas to improve, and I am very excited for this and have been excited for this since it came out months ago. I've been on the holds list forever, so I've kind of built it up pretty big in my mind. This is speculative fiction about two women, and they have an intense friendship. It's like about art stuff. I mean, you know the plot, you know the premise of the video, so you basically know the plot of the book. There's an intense friendship. Okay, next up is Stargazer by Laurie Petrou. I just found this on the shelf at the library and I thought it looked interesting. It's about two girls. One of them has like a really shitty abusive brother and the other one has a famous mom. And they become friends, but it's a fine line between admiration and envy. Okay, I'm starting with Immaculate Conception. I am going to read it and then tell you about it when I'm done. I'll see you then. Bye. Hello, I have just finished part 1 of Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang, and I am here to talk to you about it. I am going to spoil everything that happens in this book, so if you don't want to hear that, skip to the next part. So the book opens with a 1-page long prologue, where the main character is at some fancy gallery opening or maybe award ceremony, and she's hiding in the bathroom, trying to calm down her emotions after her friend has been announced missing and presumed dead. And she's really worried about going back out into this sea of people and how they're going to react to her. In this one page, we're getting so much information, right? Because after this prologue, it goes way back into the past when this main character met her best friend Mathilde in the first year of university. And you have no idea how it gets to where it's at in the prologue. How she gets to become this somewhat famous artist, it seems. How Mathilde also seems to be famous. I mean, she's been announced missing. It's known by everyone that they are close to each other. It's clear that in some ways, both of them make it big. And then, of course, you're also curious about what happened to Mathilde and what happened to their relationship. I don't always love a book that tells you what is going to happen in it, but I actually appreciate the way that it's done here. I think it gives me just enough curiosity to want to keep going without feeling like I'm going to be like sorely disappointed when I find out everything that's gone on in these in-between years. So the book proper, before we learn anything about this narrator, even her name, she's telling us about Mathilde, her best friend who she met in art school. In freshman year at this art school, Mathilde was almost mythical in her talent and her knowledge, and then also her secrecy and introversion. Everybody wanted to be her friend, and also was bitterly jealous of her. She came to the school as a university freshman, already well known for her work with this thing that's going on in the world. These what seemed to be public art sculptures that split up cities. Mathilde uncovered that the lines of these sculptures followed like economic disparity. I'm not explaining it super well, but it is as on the nose as it sounds like it is. They are like physical enforcements of the upper and lower class. They created the enclave and the fringe. Almost everyone at this art school comes from the enclave, of course. They have way more opportunities than fringe kids. And our main character, Enka, she is from the fringe. I think now that I'm more into the flow of the book, I'm a little bit more forgiving of this. Though, looking back, I still think it's kind of corny. Like, as if we need some mysterious silver snaking art piece to comment on economic inequality. I do think that there can be effective, on-the-nose speculative fiction. I think that this doesn't really teeter into that, at least so far, because it's not really questioning, like, why or who is enforcing this. That will come up, but not even that deep. Like, there's no systemic element to this. It's just like, there's the fringe and there's the enclave. And I'm a fringe kid trying to fit into the enclave world. And it's like, oh my God, could you be any more obvious? It's like, it's speculative fiction, but it only goes as far as to be like, ooh, what if? And then nothing else. So Mathilde and Enka slowly but surely become friends. Enka is obviously quite desperate for this friendship, but she also is not like totally paralyzed by a fear of rejection, which I think is a really interesting dynamic between them. Mathilde is very cold and hard to read and secretive and introverted, like I said, and there's always like a disconnect in their conversations, mostly because they are insufferable first-year art students who speak in fucking riddles. I cannot describe to you the pretension here and the authenticity of that pretension. It feels incredibly true to life. They end up becoming inseparable, and then as freshman year closes, Mathilde is overcome by her grief and her depression over the loss of both of her parents, and she's basically bedridden, and Enka stays over the summer semester to take care of her. While it's been obvious that Enka needs Mathilde, you can see here that Mathilde, on some level, needs Enka, but it more feels like she needs someone to take care of her and not Enka specifically. There is a huge power imbalance in their friendship that you can obviously see. That's really largely due to how Enka has mythologized Mathilde. Mathilde has this untouchable, betterness. She's just better than everyone. She's better at everything. Even if she has to spend all summer in bed, she can't feed herself, still, Enka sees her as a better artist more than anything. And there is nothing more valuable to Enka than being the best artist. And Enka can kind of feel this power imbalance between the two of them, but she reasons her way out of it. She rationalizes it, and she thinks to herself, we're just becoming one. We're trading parts of each other, and that's why I'm dressing like her and trying to emulate her. But you never get to see Mathilde's side, and you never get to see from Enka's perspective what Mathilde is doing for her besides the very bare minimum of validating her humanity. It's so clear that without Enka, Mathilde would find someone else to take Enka's role, but without Mathilde, Enka wouldn't know who she was. After a couple of chapters of this time in university, it jumps to the present, back to this setting where the prologue is, and it throws you right into the deep end. You're meant to be confused. You're meant to not have any idea who fucking anybody is. Enka leaves the bathroom after wiping her tears, learning that Mathilde is missing, and some board member that was part of a board that Mathilde was either the head of or also part of, she tells Enka that the news doesn't have it right, that Mathilde hasn't been missing for just a couple of weeks. No one has seen her in over a year, and they've been hiding that. This board member, I think her name is Paulina, she shows Enka the last messages that anyone received from Mathilde. They were sent to Paulina, and it seemed like they weren't necessarily meant for her, or maybe not even necessarily meant for anyone. It's a video of Mathilde walking in sand, and she's very ill looking. There's blisters all over her skin. She's leathery. Her hair is damp and greasy, and she looks very unwell. And she's laughing into the camera, and there's something going on behind her. It's frightening. Then we go back to sophomore year, where Enka is kind of trying to coach Mathilde out of this depression, trying to be whatever Mathilde needs her to be, and also fielding all of these emails and calls from museums and art collectors and whatever else happens in the art world. Mathilde is the number one person that everybody wants. They all want her to make exhibits for them. They all want to display her work. She ends up making this genius art piece where she has these Bibles, and they're trapped in an environment with two silverfish, and then the silverfish eat through the Bibles. And at the same time this happens, this impermanent art piece, this ever-changing art piece happens, there is this big breakthrough in generative AI art technology. And this breakthrough puts all art at risk of copyright violation. It tries to explain it, but I didn't really totally get it. But the professors at their school bring all of the art students into the fucking auditorium, and they're you need to go through this website where people can just generate art at the click of a button. And if any of your pieces have any similarities to any of these generative AI art pieces, then you might get sued, and we can't cover that as the university, so you need to destroy all your art. And it ruins the art world entirely almost, or completely changes the landscape of it. Enka has been spending a lot of time working on her sophomore year showcase, and she types some keywords into this website, and she finds that her thing is too risky, and it's too derivative, and it's not original, and someone else has come up with it, and it's on the website, and everything is ruined. I think I have all of the same issues with this bit of speculative fiction as I do with the other bit, which is we don't need to blow this up so big. This is an issue, and to simplify it down, but also complicate it at the same time in the way this book is doing with the issue of art versus generative AI, I don't think is really doing any favors for the commentary or for talking about these problems with any depth. I think that it's just made something really important seem kind of dumb, because this copyright thing being the main issue here is not really the main issue in real life with generative AI. And it does evolve a little bit. It becomes more about I don't know, no art can be original anymore now that everybody has access at their fingertips to making art, but even then, I feel like it's not quite getting at it, you know? Through the book so far, Enka's greatest fear has been being derivative, particularly because she comes from the fringe and everybody else is enclave, and they all know artists that she might not be familiar with, and sometimes she accidentally copies, and she realizes like there's not an original bone in her body, and this is the worst thing to be in her mind. So this AI stuff has adversely affected basically everybody except Mathilde. Like half of their class drops out, but Mathilde just manages to just kind of be above it because she is original. She's maybe the one true original artist left in the world, at least according to Enka. And her art goes big. Like everybody knows that it will, and her fame distances her from Enka. On the surface, she might pretend to be happy for Mathilde, and she's able to put on that facade really easily because she does love Mathilde, but Enka is also jealous and bitter, and she feels like she's mildly been copied with one of Mathilde's biggest pieces, that piece that she didn't get to showcase in sophomore year. Mathilde kind of took some inspiration from that. Not really, but Enka feels slighted that she's never mentioned in interviews about it. Though Mathilde does mention in interviews that she wants to start using tech, and she specifically calls out some tech company that she would like to partner with. And this is a little bit hurtful for Enka because tech has always been her medium, while Mathilde has usually done like more sculptural stuff. Specifically, this tech company that Mathilde wants to work with is Pathway Labs Corporation. Enka does a little bit of digging and she finds that this corporation is run by the son of the rich and famous art people who fund her scholarship at the school that she goes to, okay? She finds on their website that Pathway is working on this empathy project, something about downloading brains into other people's brains. And she signs up interested in this, and they get back to her and they say, can you be in Argentina in 2 days? We'll send you a plane ticket right now. And she's like, I'm gonna fucking do it. I'm gonna be part of this experiment. She does a little bit more digging into the parents of the son who runs Pathway Labs. These are the two people who fund her scholarship. They're the dolls. They're these very rich and famous people. And she realizes that the man, Richard, he is behind those borders, those silver snakes that have split up the fucking world and made her a fringe kid. His wife, Monica, is really big in like influence, art collecting. And we know that she marries into this family from the future chapters or the current day chapters, whatever. So she heads for Argentina. She gets whisked away on this private plane, and then the runner of Pathway Labs, the son of Richard and Monica, who we already know, Monica is her mother-in-law. This is Logan. We know that she's going to marry him. He gets on the plane and he's like, I actually got to tell you, we realize there's a conflict of interest because you are part of my dad's scholarship fund. It's not, the optics aren't great, but he tells her that they are looking for publicity. So they want her to come and supervise this first trial and then create an art exhibit out of it. And she agrees, of course. So she goes to Argentina. He explains to her that they're trying to increase human capacity for empathy by downloading brains into other brains. Okay? She is painting and she's like thinking of what exhibit she's going to create here. And then there's an incident when the trial begins with a man who's having a sheep brain downloaded into his, and he experiences the sheep being slaughtered and he falls into a coma. This kind of fucks up everything because there should have been something in place with their technology that would have stopped him from experiencing like really, really difficult, hardcore pain, like the experience of a sheep being slaughtered, and it obviously didn't work. So everything is called off. And there is a moment before Enka is sent home, because they can't do the exhibit anymore, they got to sweep this all under the rug, where Logan comes into her room at night and she kind of like comforts him, and he has his head on her boobs, but nothing comes of that yet. Back at school, junior year, everything is different. Now it's more of a question of like, how do we make art when generative AI exists? It doesn't go too in depth with this, but it is interesting, and it's a very interesting topic. Like a lot of this becomes students using their bodies. This is a more high-tech world than the one we live in, but it's also not too far off from the one we live in, which is interesting. Mathilde's dad died in 9/11. This is the year where Enka kind of starts to drop Mathilde because Mathilde can no longer make her feel unique, special, original, and singularly worthy, which is kind of all she's looking for in her life, but specifically with art. Enka ends up being called in to create this exhibit to rehabilitate Pathway Labs' public image, and it goes viral. She is now very closely tied to the dolls, and she kind of becomes this class traitor, forced to celebrate these borders, because everyone's always asking her, how'd you make it out of the fringe? What do you feel about the fringe? And she's like, well, adversity made me stronger and it made me a better artist, though she definitely doesn't believe that deep down. She just kind of has to force herself to. She becomes a pretty core part of Pathway Labs. She's constantly on tour with Logan. They get together 3 months into their relationship. He proposes to her. She meets his mom, Monica, who we already know from the current day chapters is this big influence in the art world. She's like kind of interested in Enka's art, and Enka feels her like losing interest a little bit and isn't totally sure why. And so she takes credit for one of Mathilde's art pieces from university, and Monica catches her. She doesn't outright accuse her, but she does imply that she knows that art piece. And we all know, including Enka, that Monica knows she's lying about it being hers. No matter what it is that Enka accomplishes, she always feels inadequate. And even when an art piece of hers or an exhibit of hers goes absolutely viral, is met with just like a total praise, all she can think is, this doesn't have like the commentary or the humanity or the connection that Mathilde's art has. She cannot stop comparing herself to Mathilde, who she has fallen out of contact with, who she has chosen to fall out of contact with. Every time Mathilde tries to call her for the past year, she has always managed to dodge the calls until she starts wedding planning and she thinks the only person who I really need to be at my wedding is Mathilde. So she calls her up and it's like kind of awkward conversation between two friends, one of whom who has been avoiding the other and is realizing that her life has continued going, that Mathilde has not just like waited in limbo for Enka to get over her feelings or something. And Mathilde also comments on something going on with her health. And Enka's like, oh my God, I'm the worst friend in the world. I can't believe I thought that she was just kind of like sitting there waiting for me to come back. We get another short chapter in the current day where she's pulled up on stage to accept some acknowledgement or award or something. It's like not important. It's just like rich people in the art world shit. But she can't do it. She has to run off stage crying because she's too focused on Mathilde. She's seeing her in the crowd. She's seeing professors and people that know Mathilde, and she just can't stop thinking about her and where she is and what a bad friend she must be to have not known that Mathilde was so unwell and has gone missing. Then we jump back to her wedding. At her wedding, it's like the rehearsal dinner, and all she can think about is how she's about to see Mathilde. Like literally no thoughts on her husband, no thoughts on the family that she's marrying into. All she's thinking about is her best friend. Obviously, we're both thinking the same thing. There's a homoeroticism to this, and I feel like it's going to get there, but it hasn't yet. And maybe I'll be disappointed if it doesn't. But, you know, there's the wisps of it, and I think that could be enough for me. Anyway, she's thinking about Mathilde. Mathilde shows up at the door and is pregnant. And she's like, yeah, this is part of an upcoming fucking exhibition. And Enka's like, that's not very original. Like just in her head, she's thinking like, okay, you're pregnant as part of an exhibition. Like everybody's done that. And then Mathilde is like mentioned something about how she has no one else to fall back on. She's doing it alone. And Enka thinks, okay, well, you know, single motherhood, that's a little bit more interesting artistically. It's so fucking ridiculous and pretentious. Everything is art to both of them. It turns out that Mathilde has created a way for women to have babies without any input from men. She's created a sperm that comes just from a woman's body. And when Enka learns this, it becomes everything in her mind. All she can think about is how creative and how original and how moving and impactful and like important for the world this art that Mathilde is creating is. She like can't focus on her wedding. She gets up on she gets up at the altar and she has to be prompted to say I do, because all she can think about is how she's wearing this veil made of cracked white iPhones to comment on like connection between people, and how that has nothing on Mathilde's art piece that actually is making social change. Everything is art, but also everything is comparison. She worships Mathilde's artistic abilities and is so constantly comparing herself that she could never possibly live up to Mathilde, and she hates her for that at the same time as worshiping her. Also, the whole wedding, Monica is hounding Mathilde saying, I've been trying to get in contact with your representative for years. They haven't let me near you. I want to work with you so bad. And at one point, Mathilde tells Enka like, you know, Logan seems nice and all, but the dolls are kind of like everything that I stand against, and I would never want to work with them, which is very fascinating considering that Enka is only here because Mathilde mentioned in an interview that she wanted to work with Pathway Labs way back when. The last chapter of part 1 is in the current day, where Enka has this like epiphany moment where she thinks she knows where Mathilde is. Something that Mathilde had mentioned to her way back in freshman year when she was like really sick in bed for that whole summer. Something about her childhood and these like cactus mazes that her dad used to plant for them, I think is where Enka thinks Mathilde is. And she leaves this fancy rich people party to go start looking for her friend. So that's where I'm at right now. I think so far there are too many speculative fiction ideas that are not coming together coherently, though they still have a chance to. I just think she's spreading herself a little bit too thin at this point, and there is not enough time or space to get into any of these things in depth. Like, we have the brain transferring and like human empathy, but then also we have the like enclave fringe shit. And then also we have like the generative AI thing. And I just think it's like these all could be different books. And also at the same time, like, they're kind of, I'm sorry to say, like, simpleton ideas. Like, they're just like, she's not doing anything with them. And it just feels like very obvious on the nose ideas that are very shallow and then told through pretentious language, which is deliberate because Enka is this pretentious art student. But I think that the dissonance there is a little bit hard to deal with. I think it's a little bit like secondhand embarrassing, but there's still a chance for that to go totally differently and be really good in the end. Of course, what I like the most here is this relationship between these two women, is the obsession and the jealousy and the anger. I would love to see more of Mathilde, and I think I'm going to. I think Enka's going to go on this journey where she understands Mathilde a little bit more than she does now, because she is still kind of a mythical figure to her. I can tell, being only 120 pages in, that this has dealt with some of my major issues that I had with Natural Beauty. It was a book that I liked and that I liked the premise of, and then I didn't love the writing, just like word choice sentence level. I thought it was unbelievably purple and like way too descriptive for me, and there were just paragraphs and paragraphs where I felt like my eyes were glazing over. That's just not the kind of writing that I like, and I think was maybe a little bit too MFA, too inexperienced, thinking that that was the way to write well. I think that has been thrown out the window in this book, especially considering the subject matter. I was like, oh God, art world. Like, it's describing art pieces. It's going to be as flowery as Natural Beauty, and it's nowhere near it. Like, it's very clear how much this author has improved, but there are some broader, like, thematic issues that still have time to be resolved. So I'm going to go read the rest of this and see if they do end up resolving, and then I'll come back and tell you more about it. I'll see you then. Bye. Hello, I have finished Immaculate Conception, and I'm here to talk to you about it. The last time I talked to you, Enka was on her way to try to find Mathilde, and she does find her. She finds her in the middle of this abandoned cactus maze. She's like emaciated and lesioned, and she's holding her decayed dead baby, the baby that she had conceived immaculately. I found this scene so incredibly hard to imagine. There's something going on with flies. The setting is very strong, but just like totally opaque to me. I couldn't get it. I read it over and over again, and at one point I just had to accept that you don't always get everything when you read. I think maybe I was really tired. I want to say I was reading this last night, and I was just so tired, and it just was not computing as a scene in my brain. The images weren't getting through to me. I think I was also thinking of it as more metaphorical than it actually was. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to take it really literally. All this to say that I can't exactly convey to you what was going on in this scene, but I think there is more to it than what I'm saying, and I apologize for that. I'm failing at my job here. So Mathilde ends up moving in with Enka, who lives with her mother-in-law, Monica, and also her two twin babies. This is the first mention of the babies, and that is definitely deliberate. Mathilde is more important to Enka than any other person in her life, including her own children. She is living with this mother-in-law, Monica, and Monica is a very, very, very privileged and wealthy woman who has a lot of control over Enka. And Mathilde brings Enka back some of her control. She manages to like fill Enka's days up with something else. She brings her back to artistry. She also brings her back to motherhood. Enka had kind of been denied the role of being a mother to her two children because Monica always has specialists on hand. Like, she always has food and lactation and play specialists. So anytime Enka ever tried to do anything, it would be like, oh, we have someone far more experienced, which I don't feel like was the most accurate representation of how rich people raise babies. Like, yes, they do separate the mother from the role of mother, and they usually raise them through like the labor of poor women. I didn't really see very much realism in like, we have a lactation specialist for any time the babies need milk kind of thing. But I also understand that this is set in a futuristic, technologically advanced society. So maybe it's just true in this world. But Mathilde kind of allows Enka to develop more of a connection with her children, to spend more time with them, and then also brings her to other things that she's been missing in her life and under her mother-in-law's control, like art. The two of them create an exhibition together. So Monica does have a stake in Mathilde's wellness. Monica is part of the foundation that is somehow connected to Mathilde. I don't think I was supposed to understand this as someone very disconnected from the art world. She makes a lot of money off of Mathilde's art. So she wants Mathilde to get better and to create art and make money for the foundation and the board of the foundation, okay? Anka wants Mathilde to stay unwell because that would mean that she stays in this house with her and also that she would stay dependent on Anka, which makes Anka feel valuable. So when Anka hears that the foundation board is starting to look for somewhere for Mathilde to live on her own, she tells Monica that Mathilde is lying about getting better, that actually her progress has stagnated. And she immediately regrets this, but she doesn't ever make a choice to take it back. She never does anything to undo this mistake that she's made. So the board of the foundation ends up pushing for Mathilde to do a trauma scan through Monica's husband, Richard's company. They do like technological advancements for humans and like experiments on people. He lives in a completely different area in this house on a compound where there's like a whole bunch of buildings. They do a whole bunch of things, it's like sci-fi, whatever. So they go for dinner at this house where they're going to talk about this like trauma scan. And they learn that it's not necessarily just like a trauma scan. It's creating digital twins of Mathilde. They scan her entire brain and then they have her brain as like a control and then a version of her brain where they've edited out all of her trauma and they age these brains very, very quickly and they see how she would develop in her life. And she doesn't want to do this, but she doesn't really have a choice. She is under a conservatorship with this foundation board. So they run this test on her to see what her brain is going to look like if they do or do not edit out this trauma, how well she is going to heal, what her mental health is going to look like, what her creativity is going to look like, if they should edit her brain so that she is fixed. There have been all these like little hints and weird, creepy little things that mostly like don't come up again and end up really meaning nothing if they do, that there's like human experimentation going on here that's maybe unethical. So while Mathilde is getting this like reading done of her brain, Anka sees a naked woman running across the yard. And so she goes in and she tells the doctor working with Mathilde, who's unconscious, she says, I saw a naked woman, and he panics. He's like, I got to go deal with that. So she is left alone with Mathilde's unconscious body and the results of the experimentation. They're like developing as if they were a photograph. And she can see, and he has told her before she told him about the naked woman, this doctor has said, Mathilde's brain is beautiful. She's the most creative person we've ever seen. She's the only person I've ever done this experiment on who is better off unedited. So Mathilde sees the unedited version of her like digital twin developing in this photography thing, whatever. She pulls it out and it stops the development. It looks like Mathilde is not going to heal, is going to end up stagnating, and it makes the other one, the edited version of her brain, look a lot better. It's only in relaying this to you right now that I'm thinking about, like, why is it called digital twins? I understand it's like a technology thing, but it's like digital, but it's also very physical. Like, it's developing like photography. I think that truly is something that's only there so that Anka can physically mess with it. So the board gets these results. They have a conservatorship over her, and they see from these meddled with results that it seems like Mathilde would be more of a moneymaker for them if she had her trauma edited out. Anka never says anything. Yet again, she is given opportunity after opportunity to come clean, and she doesn't. Mathilde doesn't want her trauma edited out. She doesn't want to forget her child, who she loves so much, and whose memory is tied very deeply to her grief over this baby, right? So Logan, who we haven't talked much about because he's hardly in this book, Anka's husband, he offers up the alternative of pathway labs. Do you remember how they were editing people's brains into other people's brains earlier in the book? They have honed that process, and it's now something called scaffold. They can do this to Mathilde, and it would help her heal from her trauma better than she could on her own. Or so is the promise, right? It's what I described to you before. Someone would have access to Mathilde's entire brain, including her trauma, and could take on some of her pain. Of course, this person is going to be Anka, and Anka doesn't recognize her own ulterior motives here, and she thinks to herself, oh, this would relieve me of my guilt of messing with her test results. And we all know that she just wants into Mathilde's brain because she thinks that Mathilde is a genius. And once she comes to some understanding of what having access to Mathilde's brain would do for her, she doesn't give Mathilde a choice in this. The same way that Monica treats her with her motherhood things and having complete control over her, she does not allow Mathilde to do anything else. She, in the name of best interests, she's like, this is the only path forward if you still want to remember Beatrice. She uses the death of Mathilde's daughter in her favor. So as this book goes on, Enka is just getting worse and worse and more despicable and continues to not recognize her own motivations and her own jealousies. Okay, then like not very long later, we learn that Logan is a clone. He's an exact clone of his father. This is like kind of nothing. At first I thought this was going to be brought up and then never come back. And it does come back, but like it's just too much. We don't need to have this cloning thing going on. His parents couldn't have a baby and his dad wanted an heir, so they cloned him. And Logan's a clone. And Logan doesn't know that he's a clone. But Enka knows because she finds him like basically almost dead. And then the guy who raised Logan was kind of like his nanny, Toru. He's like, "Oh, actually, I didn't raise him as a nanny. I was like creating him as a clone. Like he's a real person, but he's also like not human. Like I grew him in a lab." Okay? Logan's a clone. Whatever. They then begin the long process of giving Enka access to Mathilde's mind. They call it inhabiting Mathilde's mind. At one point, one of the doctors pulls her aside and, like, obviously against what his bosses would say, tells Enka that Mathilde's level of trauma is, like, unheard of in this scaffold technology, and that there is a chance that Enka will not be able to help Mathilde, and instead Mathilde will corrupt Enka. But this changes nothing for Enka because she needs Mathilde to be dependent on her, and what better way than to be literally part of her mind and the only thing that can relieve her trauma. They go through the procedure of putting these implants in their minds, and as soon as Enka wakes up, she tries to hop into Mathilde's brain. She's practiced this imagining this series of gestures, and that's the way that she can go from her brain to Mathilde's brain. And it's this really interesting thing here that I absolutely loved, where Enka transfers into Mathilde's brain and realizes that she is not really Enka anymore. And in thinking of herself, she has brought up the concept of herself in Mathilde's mind and can sort through all of Mathilde's thoughts and memories about her. And it switches into third person and talking about Enka just for this little bit, because she is like kind of not herself anymore and seeing herself through someone else's eyes. It was great. I really fucking loved that part. I also loved it because seeing herself through Mathilde's eyes is very sweet. Everything that she wishes that she was, that she thought she could never achieve, Mathilde sees her as. She sees her as creative and as a great artist and also as a very good friend. And it's also heartbreaking because you know that Enka is doing everything that she does to take advantage of Mathilde and of Mathilde's better, superior artistry. And she won't recognize that and is framing it in her mind as helping Mathilde. Over many months, she learns to inhabit Mathilde's mind and her own body at the same time. At first, she can only do it if she's like lying down and has no stimuli. And in this period of time, she's allowed very little contact with Mathilde. And this doesn't bother her at all. And it's heartbreaking to know that Mathilde has lost her best friend yet again. Only talking to her 1 hour a week absolutely means nothing to Enka because Mathilde is now an entity to her. Now Mathilde is something that she can extract resources from. And even months later, once the doctors have okayed them to spend a lot more time together, Enka still keeps her distance from Mathilde, partly because it's weird to see Mathilde's body as something that is not her own, which she has been seeing it as when she inhabits Mathilde's mind. And Enka is inhabiting Mathilde's mind as much as she can possibly stand, and she's using it for inspiration for art. She thinks that her limitation was always her own imagination, and now she has access to Mathilde's, and she's creating so much art as like Enka as Mathilde. Their whole scaffold project has become its own art piece, and she never sees any of the shittiness of this because she loves Mathilde. And she holds her in such high regard. How could she possibly hurt her? One day, Enka is sifting through Mathilde's mind, and she finds this alluded to trauma that Mathilde has buried deep down from her childhood. It's this religious sexual trauma. And Enka immediately turns this into an art piece. Without talking to Mathilde at all, she finds the priest who molested Mathilde, and she takes him into an art museum for an exhibit where he sits in silence and people ask him questions and he doesn't respond to them. And then at the end of it, she forgives him. This exhibit goes for 3 months, and in all that time, there is not even one mention of Mathilde. Enka can feel to herself that Mathilde has given her permission because she spends so much time in Mathilde's mind. It's like she can make decisions for her and convince herself that Mathilde is making those decisions. And she can also justify it by watching Mathilde's mind heal every time she goes into it. But at the end of the exhibit, Mathilde comes to her and says, I didn't consent to you healing that trauma for me. And the two of them fall apart in a different way. It's no longer Enka avoiding Mathilde. Mathilde is now angry at Enka, very reasonably and rightfully. Okay, so the clone thing. Since learning that Logan is a clone of his father, she's been like disgusted by him and she has a really hard time having sex with him. She's also spending most of the day as Mathilde. So one day Logan initiates and she decides to do it in Mathilde's mind. And this kicks off a huge fight. He's like, I didn't consent to that. And Mathilde didn't consent to that. He tells her, I wish that you could be yourself. And she's like, what did being myself ever get me? Look at me now. I am this hugely successful artist, what I always wanted to be. Being myself was nothing. And he was like, being yourself got you me and like our beautiful children. And she fully says, that's not enough. Logan then calls it like he sees it. And he says, you're exploiting Mathilde. You said that this was for her benefit, but you're just taking and taking and you're not doing anything for her. And she hears that. That's the worst thing she could hear because she knows it's true. And she lashes out and she tells him, yeah, well, you're a fucking clone of your dad, dude. Logan, of course, learning that he's a clone of his father, freaks out and runs away. A couple of days later, Mathilde is doing a speech at a university about sexual harassment because this exhibition with the priest was like the biggest art piece ever and everybody knows of it. And now she's doing talks about sexual harassment. Oh my fucking God. She collapses on stage. Monica then calls her and says that Mathilde's implant has been fucked with and she's probably very sick and that they need to find her. Enka goes to Mathilde's apartment and oh my God. Okay. She goes there and it says, small is my first thought looking in Mathilde's apartment. And the word small is very subtly formatted in the same way that all of the exhibition names have been formatted. She, in this moment of finding Mathilde half dead on the floor, is thinking about how to exploit this and turn it into an art piece. Holy fucking shit. Are you kidding? That was so clever. She picks up Mathilde's almost dead, like faint pulse, sweating body and takes her to the compound where she sees that Logan also is and is also in distress. She learns that Logan freaked out, like lost his mind learning that he was a clone, came to the compound and destroyed everything, all of the art pieces they've collected and also all of like the technology. And he manually severed the link between Mathilde and Enka. That dude who created and raised Logan makes a new copy of him, but tells Enka under no uncertain terms she had murdered the original Logan, that she is a murderer, and he obviously fucking hates her. In telling Logan and in his ensuing actions, she has also kind of murdered Mathilde. Mathilde has extensive brain damage, moves back in with their family, and over the years loses her mind completely, becomes a shell. She loses all access to language and then all access to movement. She needs 24/7 care, and as she is degenerating, Enka is taking photos of her and recording their conversations daily to make an exhibit out of it. Around the time that Mathilde loses language, Enka gets this migraine, and this migraine lasts for years. She can't do anything to relieve it. Finally, she goes back to the compound and she talks to the doctor who set up the implants between her and Mathilde, and she says, I think that this has something to do with the implant. I know that they're severed, but it's still in my head. I feel like this is causing my migraines. And he looks into it and he sees that Mathilde is somehow transmitting information to Enka, but not information. She's transmitting pure feeling. She is giving Enka this constant migraine. So their connection has not been completely severed. And Enka goes home and she finds that she can still imagine that series of gestures and enter Mathilde's mind. And when she gets there, Mathilde is waiting for her, has been waiting for her for years, and tells her, I thought you would come and meet me here and we would be able to figure out how to fix me together. Mathilde had been sending her these signals with the migraine, trying to get her to enter her mind again. Enka doesn't actually do anything to try to help Mathilde. She leaves Mathilde's mind and she thinks, holy shit, she has had access to my brain in the same way I had access to her brain. She understands how much of a violation this was, even though Mathilde had like originally kind of consented to it. Enka was always entering her brain without her knowledge. And Enka's thinking to herself that she can no longer lie about who she is and what she's done because Mathilde can see all of it, understands all of it. Mathilde knows the truth. She knows all of the times that Enka failed to make the right decision. She knows all of the betrayals. She knows all of the jealousy. And Mathilde told her when they were in Mathilde's mind that she still loves her. Angrily, but still. This really fucks shit up for Enka. She comes out and she realizes that she can't lie to herself, that she has to face the truth of who she is. She tells everyone what she did to affect Mathilde's test results and how she managed to like weasel her way into having access to Mathilde's mind. She loses everything. But she doesn't actually lose everything because for some reason, this second version of Logan loves and accepts her, and she stays with her wealthy family who she's betrayed, and we get an epilogue years later of her inviting some of the foundation board members to her birthday party, and at the very end, we learn that Mathilde is still in this house and has been like basically comatose for many years and has just asked for a pen and a piece of paper and is drawing. And that's the end of the story. Okay, so like a lot going on here, right? I think that's my main complaint about this book. I did really like it, but there's too much. There is so many things happening. There are so many themes. There's so much plot. There are so many, this is the worst offender. So many little ideas, like speculative fiction, science fiction things that are thrown in here and feel very disconnected. All these little like technological advancements that a lot of them end up being somewhat or totally meaningless. They don't really do all that much to like set the scene of the book, and I don't think that they are delved into with very much depth. I do think thematically this book is able to let you think about the themes and interpret them on your own, which is not something I felt like it was doing with the characters. With the characters, it was a lot of telling and not very much showing. I thought that Huang knew the intricacies of her character very well, had a really good understanding of who particularly Enka was, but she wasn't really able to communicate that without outright telling us things about Enka and like how she thought about things and how that affected her actions, like very, very clearly and explicitly, when it would have been more interesting to have those shown to me. The characters are fleshed out, but they're not people that you learn about and come to know. They are characters that are taught to you. If that makes any sense, if that is a distinction that means anything to anyone else. I did think the jealousy and guilt and regret were all nuanced and well developed, and they did impact me, but I felt like they could have had such a stronger impact had there been more emotionality, had this not been so detached of a narrator. Every once in a while, my stomach would hurt with pain for these women, but then most of the time, I thought that Enka was so distant from me and also so distant from everyone else that it was hard to really connect. And even with the abundance of ideas in this story, I think that is an issue, but if I had connected more emotionally to this narrator and to Mathilde, I feel like this could have been a 5-star read for me. I did think that Enka was complex. I thought that she was like obviously despicable, and there's a very believable ramping up of her despicable behavior, but then at the same time, she is in some ways sympathetic. She's showing us like this ugliness of humans that we would rather not think about and would rather deny. She is an exaggeration of all of the worst parts of ourselves that we don't want to recognize but are familiar. There are so many really interesting little aspects of the dynamic between Mathilde and Enka, like the fact that Enka ignores her own unwell behavior and feelings, and like her mental health is not ever at the forefront because Mathilde beats her in everything, including in being mentally unwell. I liked how it explored this like shifting landscape of need between the two characters, how they're always needing each other in different ways at different points, and their relationship never feels balanced. This book is obviously poking fun at the silliness of the art world while also engaging in this very deep and serious exploration of the impact of the art world on the individual. The competition and the jealousy and the ambition and the awe, how Enka manages to strip Mathilde of her humanity by seeing her as an artist first, which of course allows her to do the horrible things that she ends up doing to Mathilde. I also loved with Enka's character how she will go to these insane lengths in the name of art, but she will never put herself at risk. She will go to lengths on behalf of other people's health and safety and wellness. That to me is more of a unique story of like the impact of the art world, and I thought it was really interesting the whole time. When I talked to you the first time, I think I said that I wanted more of Mathilde and of Mathilde's perspective on this friendship, and we do get little glimpses of that towards the end, and I actually think that the restraint that Huang shows in giving us Mathilde's perspective on this is more impactful than us knowing all of it. Just seeing little bits of Mathilde's unconditional love for her friend is devastating. In terms of prose, I thought that this was an astronomical improvement over Natural Beauty. Like I said, that book is very flowery, very purple, very descriptive, and though I liked the premise, I had a hard time getting through it because of the prose. This, you can see how much she has evolved as a writer, and it makes me so excited to see where she's gonna go next. She has some really great, fun ideas. She put too many of them into this book, though. So much is going on here. I thought this was engaging, exceptionally well written on the sentence level. It has this very like careful and deliberate prose that's such a huge step up from Natural Beauty. Like, I cannot emphasize that enough. Though this book certainly isn't without its flaws, I felt totally immersed in it the entire time. I found it very easy to pick up, very easy to continue reading. I wanted to know everything about these characters. I wish it was shown to me more, but I was okay with it just being told to me. I even felt connected to the world, even though there was too much happening. It folded me in to the lives of these people and the setting that they were in. And it also made me feel almost like responsible for what was going on. I felt personally connected despite the narrator's detachment. I think it could have done more with everything that it did, but it also did everything enough to be a good book. Does that make any sense? I feel quite sated with the fucked up friends. I feel like these friends were exactly what I was looking for. Obsessive, intense, selfish. It was great. The next book I'm reading here is Stargazer, which I've never heard anybody talk about ever, and I just randomly picked up at the library. It says it's a fine line between admiration and envy. So it sounds really similar to Immaculate Conception. I'm going to go read that, and I'll talk to you about it when I'm done. I'll see you then. Bye. Hello there. I'm only like 70 pages into Stargazer, but I thought I would just sit down and give you a little update, introduce you to the characters, get you into the setting, and talk about what has happened so far. 70 pages is not enough for me to have formed really any opinions on the book so far, which is part of why I'm so bad at DNFing. I know a lot of people give a book like 50 pages, and if they're not drawn in, they give up there. I can't tell until at least halfway through, and once I'm halfway through, the sunk cost philosophy gets to me. The book opens with one of our two main characters, Diana. She's at a party freshman week of university, and she's watching her best friend Arel across the room, and she's drawing Arel in her sketchbook. It then jumps back 5 years in the past to a summer that Diana spent improving her art because she had broken her left arm while she was at her family's cabin because her brother is a bully and maybe or maybe not tripped her. Keith is like this very classic abusive bully older sibling where he needs to outdo everything that she does to remain on top. And he is their parents' favorite, and their parents ignore the abuse that he directs towards Diana. And Diana thinks to herself that she wishes that he hated her, but he doesn't actually think about her that much. She's just like the closest target that gets in the way of his perfect life that he loves. So Diana was 13, Keith was 16 or 17. He was hanging out with the kids at the cabin next to their parents' cabin, and they were like doing races back and forth, timing each other. And Diana was sitting inside watching them because she knew that she would be punished if she joined in on anything that Keith was doing, and especially if she did better than him. And then she just like kind of just wanted to be a kid. She didn't want to keep making herself small for Keith's sake, and she knew that she was going to pay for this. And then she does. He trips her and she breaks her arm, and she spends the rest of the summer kind of miserable, sitting in her room at their actual house, not their cabin, and looking across at the magnificent, glorious, luxuriously rich family that lives across from them. This family has like a house that's like pure windows, and in it lives Marianne Taylor, and she is an egregiously, unrealistically famous fashion designer. And she's also Arel's mom. Arel and Diana are the same age and have always lived across the street from each other, but they didn't know each other until right before they left for university, which we go back to, Diana and Arel at university. It is a very atmospheric university, and I kind of love it. I think it really well captures this idealized feeling you have of what it's going to be like when you first leave your parents' house. And it's in this very strongly built up setting. It's on that same lake. She's living at her parents' cabin, and they paddle every day across the lake to this little art school that's like all the classes are in cabins. It's like all set in the forest on the lake. Absolutely ridiculously beautiful, and also like so dreamy it doesn't feel real. You wake up in a cabin every morning, and then you paddle across the lake to do your art school classes in another cabin. That is ridiculous, and I absolutely fucking love it. We then get a little bit of Arel's experience as a teenager and how she didn't really get to live the life of a teenager because her mom is so incredibly famous. Like, famous to a degree where it's, like, kind of bothering me. Like, who actually really cares this much about some random fashion designer in Toronto, you know? While Diana had looked in on this family from the outside through their big glass windows and imagined them as being far more loving and close than her own, this wasn't actually the experience that Arel had. Arel never got to live outside of her mom's shadow, to be herself as an individual, to have freedom outside of the image of her mom that everybody has. Like, there's apparently paparazzi waiting outside the door every time that she ever left the house. There's this really telling story of Arel sneaking out of the house and going to a rave for the first time, and it not really being her scene, but also it being kind of the first time in her life that she has a moment to herself. Like, she's at this rave, she's on ecstasy, she's partying, and someone takes a photo of her in this moment, like with her eyes closed dancing to the music. And she had stolen one of her mom's pieces that she was in the middle of designing and was wearing it in this photo. And this photo goes like ultra mega viral. By the way, it's the 90s. This is all happening in the 90s. So Arel doesn't like get in trouble like a normal teenager would for sneaking out of the house and doing drugs and going to a rave. She is a product now. She's this beautiful teenage daughter of a fashion designer who can wear her mother's clothes and make people buy them. At one point, her mom like strokes her face and is like, "This is the face that sold 1,000 shirts." And I was thinking to myself, like, I know it was the 90s, but like, 1,000 shirts doesn't seem like that many. They've like framed this shirt and hung it up in the house. There's this famous photo of her that's in like all the newspapers. They've blown it up. That's also framed and hanging in the house. And she's like, "You sold 1,000 shirts. That seems like a really small number. What are we talking about?" So Arel spends her life always wanting to steal away, always wanting to disappear, unsure of who she is and where she fits into the world outside of her rich and famous family. It's this interesting contrast between the two of them, where Diana's family life, specifically her brother, forced her to be small, and now at university, she's like big, she's confident, she walks with her head held high, she's not insecure about how tall she is, she wants to appear even taller. She almost comes across as a little bit snooty in her confidence. And then Arel's family forced her to be bigger than she wanted to be, and she's now very small, very shy, very afraid. You do think that it's a little bit strange that these two girls who now in university are so close to be inseparable, that they didn't know each other living across the street their entire lives. And we finally get to see what was happening before the two of them met each other. Diana had been at her parents' cabin lusting after this college that she ends up going to, but knowing that she wouldn't actually be able to go there because her older brother Keith was set on going there, and she could not possibly go to the same school as him because he's such a piece of shit and he makes her life absolutely miserable. Then she says something about, "And then that day turned into the best day of my life." And then we go to Arel. Arel, who during the same summer had been seeing her brother's friend and was maybe possibly pregnant with him. This is like very much a first love story, when you think that you will never love anyone more than the first guy that you ever kissed, than the guy that you lose your virginity to. But then Diana's brother Keith dies, and Keith was friends with both Arel's brother and the guy that she was seeing. They were all on the rowing team. Keith had died in some sort of freak diving accident on the lake at the cabin, and only his sister was there. I think we all pretty clearly know what happened. I don't think it's trying to hide from you that Diana likely did something to influence Keith's death, or maybe just that she's really happy that it has happened. So Arel is like secretly pregnant, and she can't really get in contact with this guy Tim because he is grieving the loss of one of his best friends, and he doesn't really want all that much to do with her. Their relationship was always secret. They're quite a few years apart, and also Tim doesn't want to lose his other good friend, Arel's brother, when Arel's brother finds out that he's been seeing his little sister, cause ew. Diana and Arel finally meet when Marianne invites Diana in and basically sets up a play date with her and Arel, even though they're both 16, because she pities Diana because Diana's brother has just died. Marianne is this figure who's like the cool mom to the point where she is no longer a good mother. But Diana sees them as having a connection beyond that, as having this like artist to artist connection. And you see Diana and Arel's first meeting through Arel's perspective, and I think you know somewhere in the back of your mind that Diana has pulled some strings to get herself closer to Marianne through Arel. And it's a little bit sad for Arel, who in the present day you know wants to be divorced from her mother's image, and whose closest and most important relationship is rooted in an obsession with her mother. At school, Arel just wants to disappear when people recognize her as being her mother's daughter, and Diana wants to protect her from that, and also wants to be mistaken for Arel, to be mistaken as the one who is Marianne Taylor's daughter, which she often is because her and Arel are, like I said, inseparable. So that's all I really have to tell you 70 pages in. As I'm sure you can tell, not much has happened, and I only really noticed that in relaying it to you. It feels like things are happening. It feels interesting and engaging, and I want to pick this up, I think, because I want to know what happens in the relationship between these two friends, because it is very intense, very all-encompassing, and that is of course not going to go well, especially because there's this thing that is very similar to Immaculate Conception where Diana is doing art school. I think Arel is an English major. Diana's classes very much emphasize competition and competition making you better, and it's pretty obviously telegraphing to us that that is going to become important in her relationship with Arel, or maybe in her relationship with Marianne. I do think it kind of sucks for my enjoyment of this book that I'm reading it right on the heel of Immaculate Conception, because I think Immaculate Conception was a lot more knowledgeable and aware of the art school aspects and was like doing a really good job at satirizing that, whereas this feels much more like a kind of ignorant caricature of what art school is like. Not that I would really know. I think just reading the other book, it rang so true, and this one is like very stereotypical. But as long as those aspects of Diana's life only stay like really minorly important, I don't think it will take away too much from my enjoyment of the book altogether. Certainly this book also has a lot of telling and not very much showing, but it is written in third person, so I think that can be a little bit more forgivable. I also think that the third person perspective in Stargazer makes the distance and detachment of the characters a little bit more understandable, alongside the fact that that distance and detachment is kind of highlighting their isolation from the rest of the world. It's shutting you as the reader out in the same way Diana and Arel have shut the entire world out, and it's really just like them staring at each other. Everything else is a blur. I'm gonna go spend the rest of the day reading this. I still haven't decided what I feel about the writing style, which is something. It's definitely something, and I hope to have some comments on that by the time I'm done with it. But right now, I'm flip-flopping between hating it and loving it. I will see you probably at the end. Bye. Hello, I have finished Stargazer. Let's talk about it. Last I left you off, I think I was talking about when Arel and Diana first met, this like planned playdate that they had. During this playdate, I'm going to keep calling it that even though they're like 16, 17 at the time, Diana is like very aloof, very cool, and Arel is being quite cold. Far more cold than we know her as in the present day, but Diana's kind of unreceptive to this coldness. She's never trying to balance it out with any warmth. So Arel just kind of randomly comes out and tells Diana that she's pretty sure that she's pregnant, and Diana very calmly, collectedly goes and gets her a pregnancy test. They confirm it, and then Diana takes her to an abortion clinic. And that night that Arel gets the abortion, Diana tells her something, okay? And you think that this something is a confession to murdering her brother, but you find out pretty quickly that it's actually just her telling Arel that she hated her brother. And Arel takes this the wrong way. She says, he knows that you didn't really hate him. And Diana's thinking, well, I did hate him. And she never brings it up with Arel again. In the present day, Arel is taking up poetry a little bit more seriously. She submits an entry into her school's journal, and she gets accepted under Diana's name. She's given Diana's name because she doesn't want her mom's influence to be the reason why she's published in this journal. Diana knows this and is okay with it, but then they go to a reading for the journal where Arel's going to get up on the stage, and Diana outs her as being Marianne Taylor's daughter. And she frames it as being for her so she can like take pride in who she really is, but it's kind of a betrayal, and Aurel refuses to see it for what it is because she thinks of Diana so highly. Being once again publicly known as the daughter of this famous fashion designer is really stressful for Aurel, and even just this poetry reading night, this shitty guy comes up to her and starts talking about her mom and then talking about how he's friends with Tim. And it causes Aurel a lot of anxiety and a lot of like spiraling about who she is and whether she can ever be someone outside of just her family. And she never lays any of this blame on Diana for outing her as being daughter of Marianne Taylor. She only ever blames it on her mom or her family or herself. The middle of this book is kind of a lot of like little vignettes that do get quite repetitive. The next one that happens is that Aurel and Diana go home for Christmas. Aurel's family is going on vacation. They're going to Whistler. This is a very Canadian book. And while they're gone, Diana sneaks into their home and you can see her as she tries to like be Aurel, but mostly as she aspires for the validation from Marianne that she so desperately wants. She even lets herself into Marianne's studio and like flips through her things and imagines Marianne showing her these things. It's quite obvious at this point in the book that Diana's focus is really on Marianne and Aurel is just like a conduit to get to Marianne. When they go back for the second semester of school, Diana throws herself into her work, into her artistry, again, wanting approval from Marianne. Every time Marianne calls, Diana picks up the phone. Aurel is avoiding her mother, but also throwing herself into self-destruction and drugs. So Diana is kind of being the daughter that Marianne seems to want. We then get a flashback to the weekend that Keith died. Diana had just been gifted a car for her birthday, and she was kind of like taking back control of the isolation forced upon her by Keith by going to the family cottage where her and Aurel now live on her own for the very first time. She comes up here and it's like absolute bliss to be away from everyone and everything, and particularly Keith. And as she's lying on the dock, just thinking about how happy she is to be here and how nice this solitude is, now that it's solitude that she is in control of, that she has agency in, Keith shows up with his friends. And you know that he's going to, because you know this is the weekend that Keith died, and you know that he died at the cottage. And still, there is a moment that you feel her devastation, even though you know that it's coming. In this memory, there is once again an allusion to the idea that Diana might have murdered Keith. It really wants you to think that throughout the book. As it turns out, you find out later on, she didn't really. He was jumping off the dock to go swimming and she called his name and he turned around mid-jump and it caused him to like hit his head on some rocks. And then he drowned and she watched him drown. But the book makes it seem like she had a very active role in his death when it was pretty fucking passive. It makes it seem like she hit him on the head. Like it's always talking about blood in the water and stuff. And it turns out he did just hit his head. And every time she's like, I told everybody that he jumped in and he must have hit his head on something. Well, that is what happened. I don't know why it's framing it like it's a lie. In the present day, Diana has been allowing Aurel to have a friend, Rachel, so that Diana can spend more time focusing on her art. She is entirely an artist. Aurel no longer really matters to her, except as the subject of her art. There's actually some resentment growing between Diana and Aurel. I mean, Aurel just wants to go back to how things were before Diana was kind of shutting her out, and Diana resents Aurel for not like appreciating the recognition that the notoriety of her name gives her, but Diana is claiming that for herself. She considers herself an honorary Taylor daughter, the better Taylor daughter, the one who's living up to the potential that Aurel is throwing in the garbage. She even signs up for a triathlon for Marianne's approval. Everything that she's doing is for Marianne's approval, whether or not she admits that to herself. So Diana is working on her art show, working on her paintings, kind of like trying to make a name for herself in the art world, and also torturously training for this triathlon, while Aurel is falling deeper and deeper into drug use. She's just barely passing her classes and she's totally losing herself. The point of doing all of these drugs is to lose herself. And like I said, she's ignoring her mom's calls. When Marianne calls, Diana answers. And one time Diana answers and she doesn't realize it, but she's putting on Aurel's voice. And before she can correct Marianne and say, oh, actually, I'm Diana, Marianne starts shit-talking her. She says, I mean, kind of reasonably, she's like, oh my God, it's you. I thought I was going to have to talk to Diana about art for an hour again. In a moment, Diana realizes that her relationship with Marianne has always been platitudes from Marianne's side. And I think we always knew this. Seeing the context of growing up in the Marianne Taylor household and how she was like the cool mom, you knew that she was not treating Diana differently from the way she treated her children's other friends, that Diana was never special. But Diana is realizing this in like a moment of absolute devastation. It destroys everything she thought she knew about the world and about her place in it. She realizes Marianne is not a mother figure to her, that Marianne doesn't treat her like a daughter, no matter how much she might joke about that when thinking that Diana is Aurel, she speaks to Aurel so differently, with genuine care and attention. She tells Aurel that she thinks Diana is very intense, that Diana thinks that the world revolves around her, and that in all these conversations that they've had, that Aurel and Diana had both seen as being like this intimacy between Diana and Marianne. Every time, Marianne felt like she couldn't get a word in. This pretty short conversation breaks something in Diana, and there's actually some really fucking terribly cliche symbolism here where she hangs up the phone and then she breaks a mirror and then she looks at the reflections of herself in the shards of the glass of the mirror. That is awesome. How incredibly corny. I honestly don't think it could be more on the nose or stereotypical. It was so silly. Diana blames this all on Aurel because she can't just blame it on herself. What is she going to do? And Aurel has always been a vessel for her, a means to an end in some way. So Diana withdraws from her entirely. She focuses all of her energy and attention into the art show and the triathlon, which are on the same day. When the triathlon comes, Aurel and Rachel are there cheering for Diana, who I've definitely been calling Diane, and I just can't stop. I'm sorry. Diana wins the triathlon, and the very end of it is her shooting the gun, the triathlon gun, I don't know, a BB gun, and she shoots the beer can while staring directly into Aurel's face. And Aurel's like, she was sending me a message. I don't really know. I don't know if the book knows what it was doing with that either. But maybe it was just a warning for what is to come, because then it's the art show. And at the art show, Aurel comes in to see these very cliche pieces that Diana has painted of her as like a princess and also a woman who is addicted to drugs. It's like showing the artifice of the Marianne Taylor family and like the facade of fame, whatever. It's a lot. And also nothing. I don't know. This book has very little understanding of art, I think. And I don't think I would be complaining this much if I hadn't just read a book that I thought had a very intricate understanding of art. This art show is Aurel painted as her worst fears realized, as a spoiled princess. And it's voyeuristic. And it's like this expose of Diana's very close friend. It is a betrayal on another level. And yet Aurel needs Diana, is dependent on her, and so is forced to forgive Diana, who, by the way, is not apologizing, who does not ask for or need Aurel's forgiveness, even though this is so clearly all born out of cruelty, out of a desire to hurt Aurel, out of kind of the things that she learned from her brother's behavior. These paintings also invite scrutiny from the peers that Aurel has tried so desperately to blend in with. It is the worst thing that Diana could have done to her, and yet Aurel does not extract her life from Diana's. She just lets her continue to do this. She makes herself small, she abandons her own feelings, and she goes from being her mother's product to being Diana's product. And the paintings, they are huge news. They're the talk of the fucking town. Big press surrounding these paintings, partly because they're very good, I think on just really like a technical level, but also because of the subject of the paintings, which is the famous Marianne Taylor's daughter. And it's like kind of a critique of Marianne Taylor's fame. Diana very quickly gets an exhibit where she's going to show and sell these paintings. And she's like constantly fielding calls from agents and shit. She becomes the star painter of the school. Marianne, of course, is incredibly angry about this, but not about the exploitation of her daughter's struggles. Not even really about anything to do with her daughter struggling. She's angry about the press. She's angry about what this does for her image and for her reputation. And Aurel is in this position where she feels forced to defend Diana, but but it's breaking her. She is now fully in the throes of addiction. And all of her struggles are just fodder for Diana to use in more paintings. If that sounds familiar, it might. Marianne comes to visit to try to talk some sense into either of the girls, and she goes first to Diana's studio, where she sees a painting that Diana has made of her and Arel standing outside of the abortion clinic. Marianne screams at her and then storms out, and she runs into Grace, who's like the head of the fine arts department and has kind of like taken Diana under her wing and given her like a special studio space. Marianne and Grace had went to school together and kind of been like rivals when they were in school, and Marianne made it big, and Grace is obviously still here teaching, and so to them is the one who has failed. And you understand that there were ulterior motives in Grace giving so much attention to Diana and really pushing her to continue with this subject matter, because Grace knew that the girl she was seeing in Diana's paintings was the daughter of her old-time rival. Then Marianne finds Arel, and she decides that she's going to take her daughter away. This is obviously not working for her. She is struggling so much, and she has no support system here. She's reliant on Diana, who doesn't care about her at all. And Marianne says, well, let's go to Europe or something. Why don't you go to, we'll transfer your credits somewhere where no one will know you. And this is obviously very appealing to Arel. While Marianne is having this conversation with Arel, Grace has gone into Diana's studio and has turned around this kind of hidden painting and thought to herself, oh my God, she didn't. There's no way she had the balls to do that, okay? Tuck that into your back pocket for a minute. That night, Arel goes to get some drugs, which was usually Diana's job, and she uses the acid and the ecstasy and whatever else as like an olive branch to reach out to Diana one last time, knowing now that she's going to leave this life behind. They take drugs, they get really high, there's a storm, they go out on the lake in the canoe. You know what's coming, you know what's coming, you know what's coming. Arel accidentally says to Diana that she's leaving. She says, I'm gonna miss you so much. And then she's like, oh shit, sorry, I thought I told you that I'm abandoning you. And Diana takes this abandonment, and then she takes the paddle, and she swipes Arel into the water, knowing Arel is a very bad swimmer, and then holds her head under the water, this time an active participant in the death of someone close to her, someone who she actually loved, but maybe never did actually. Someone who she was very good at pretending to love, and also who you didn't need to try all that hard to convince them that they were loved by you. A month or so later, it's Diana's planned exhibit at this Toronto Art Museum, and Grace is there, her mentor, who she hasn't really had contact with because she left the school after Arel's death. And Grace sees this painting that she had seen in Diana's studio, now fully rendered, fully realized. It is a painting of Arel under the lake water, dead. You thought that Diana killed her in like a moment of weakness or a moment of anger, but you now know that it was planned all along. And that's where the book ends, with Diana having killed Arel in like the physical and spiritual sense, and with her on her way to becoming this great artist. So that's the plot of Stargazers by Laurie Petrou. I still have very complicated feelings about this. Was this book good? I don't know. Did I like it? I also don't know. I've just thrown it on the ground. I think there are a lot of people out there that would really love this very moody atmosphere and dramatic character study. And then I think there are a lot of people out there who would find it very difficult to deal with the melodrama of the writing style and the very poor pacing. The writing and the sentence structure is just a lot. I don't know how else to describe it. I spent the entire 250 pages of this book thinking of how I could possibly convey this writing style. It's making it seem like is making stronger choices with the writing than it actually is. I think it is just very dramatic. And it's also very one note and quite repetitive just on the sentence level with how each sentence is structured. It's kind of the same thing every time, and each time it's like too moody. Like it's just trying to be so fucking moody with the way it's written. You just would have to read a page and I think you would get what I'm saying. But it's kind of a struggle. I will also say at the same time, though, that it's not that hard to kind of like get into it and just let it wash over you. The pacing was harder to deal with. I thought that the pacing was really poor in this book. In the beginning, I was quite interested, like I said, when I gave you that 70-page update, and then the middle gets so overly repetitive that it becomes a slog. It's just repetition without adding anything to the characters or to the story. And then at the end, everything happens way too fast without any satisfying buildup. So all of the darkness finally comes out and you don't feel rewarded. You feel relieved that it didn't end up going nowhere, because for a lot of the book, it feels like it's going to end up going nowhere. It is pretty unfortunate for this book and my experience and review of it that I am reading it right after reading Immaculate Conception, because compared to that book, all of the art school, art world, artist stuff feels so empty. It feels like it is being written from a place of very little understanding of any of that. And I really don't think this would have bothered me if I hadn't just read a book that did this so much better. It actually made me appreciate Immaculate Conception more. I think that I didn't praise that book enough for how intelligent it was about these conversations and for how well it conveyed to the reader that it was coming from a place of knowledge about the art world and artists and the politics and attitudes of all that. In comparison, this one just felt like glaringly, obviously ignorant, and not in like a super negative way, but I think if you are an artist or if you went to art school, you should avoid this book at all costs. I think it will piss you off immensely with how absolutely inaccurate it feels. I already complained about this, but even just like the fashion designer, the famous fashion designer stuff, first of all, why is she even a fashion designer? I feel like that was meaningless. There was no reason for her to be specifically a fashion designer, and it kind of ended up adding nothing to the story and not being like thematically relevant at all. But then it's so overblown. Like, you're telling me this fashion designer, Marianne Taylor, who lives in Toronto, is famous enough that people are like, paparazzi are following her daughter to university? I do not buy that. Am I out of... This was in the 90s too. Like, am I out of the loop? I don't think celebrity culture has ever been at that level. She's a random Canadian fashion designer. The paparazzi... Like, no. Right? Perhaps I am the ignorant one, but I think that the celebrity of this family could have been conveyed in a way that felt a little bit more realistic or had a little bit more of an impact on the day-to-day lives of the characters, instead of it just being this very flat thing of like, there are paparazzi sometimes, and that's something that I have to deal with. And actually, that brings me to another point, which is that sometimes the messaging of this book was so simplistic and so childish that it was almost laughable. Like, there are many points where it's like, you need to understand, being a rich, famous girl isn't all it's cracked up to be. And like, that is the commentary. That's what the book is saying. And then the other main message of the book is like, the grass is always greener on the other side. You think that other families have it so good, but you're not seeing the whole picture when you're idealizing them. And that feels like a book with messaging for 12-year-olds, which maybe this is a little bit young adult. I mean, the characters are young adults, but then this gratuitous drug use that's happening throughout the book does not fit in. Right? Like, that, those things don't really work with each other. I would say that the whole thing, from plot to characters to messaging, is very, very simple, very surface level. The characters, particularly, like, their emotions are simple, their motivations are simple, there's not any depth to them. And I say all that, but the sum of my complaints is not how I actually feel about this book. You would think, with everything I've just said, that I hated this with a passion, or at best that I felt indifferent towards it. And though I never thought that this was a masterpiece or like a really, really good piece of work, I largely enjoyed my time with it. And that honestly could be due simply to the atmosphere. The atmosphere was just that good. I was thinking to myself, as someone who has literally never seen Gilmore Girls, even a clip ever in my life, but knows generally through cultural osmosis what Gilmore Girls is, I think aesthetically this book is Gilmore Girls. It's like very fall. It's very like drinking coffee and there's leaves on the ground and we're wearing sweaters. And could I name even one more thing about Gilmore Girls? Small town. It's very much, in my mind, this is what Gilmore Girls is. It has a striking atmosphere, and it's also very good at setting any of the many scenes in the book, because it is so many vignettes for so long, with like just these small little details that create a perfect image. I think it shows a lot of restraint in giving you these little details, and it knows exactly what to include, and I really appreciated that throughout the entire book. Often I felt like those details were really evoking girlhood in a way that I'm sure would be appreciated by a lot of people. And again, Gilmore Girls, that has girl in it, so I feel like my comparison is right. My personal taste in books does want more darkness. And this is not really a problem with the book. I think I just kind of misread the summary as alluding to a book that was going to be a little bit more focused on the darkness instead of just throwing it all in at the end. I wanted more tension. I wanted more buildup. I wanted more of a spiraling and more of a easily trackable development of these women's relationship and not just like a falling out that happens kind of like that. I do think that the back and forth timelines and the repetition of the middle part really did strip it of any tension in the present day. I feel like if this book got a little bit deeper into the obsession and had a little bit more urgency and like, I don't know, stomach turning fear of what's going to happen with this intense relationship between these two women, then I could have ignored all of my other issues with it and had like a really, really good time. But as it is now, with the only memorable thing really just being the atmosphere, I will probably quickly forget this book. Okay, I'm gonna say something and it's gonna make me sound like an idiot because it seems like something that's really obvious and would be true of all books, but there's something more to it here that I can't exactly describe to you. Here's what I'm saying. There is an audience that would love this book. There is an audience that would find this book absolutely terrible. And there is an audience like me that would be just okay with it. I know that sounds really obvious. That sounds like it could apply to literally any piece of media ever to exist. But there's something more about it here. Something about this book is just like so not up to interpretation, but like up to taste, I guess. I don't know what to tell you to really quantify that theory. And I also don't know how to differentiate any of those groups of readers. So I don't know how to recommend this to someone necessarily. I don't know how to tell you which group you would fit into. So it's kind of a useless piece of review, but I'm putting it in anyway. I think that if you want to be immersed in a setting and relive that like romanticization period of you imagining what it's going to be like moving out of your parents' house, then you should give this book a shot. I know that there is someone out there who will love this. I just don't know how to find them. So this is like kind of a half recommendation. That's kind of all. I don't really have anything more to say. If you have any recommendations for books about like actually really obsessive and intense friendships, particularly between women, I would love to hear about those. I really want to read Pig by Mathilde Pretesi, but I can't get my fucking grubby little mitts on it. I think it was only ever published in the UK. So I need to track that down and then do this again. So if you have recommendations for the next time I read books under this theme, please let me know. Sell them to me in the comments. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.